Hello, everyone, and welcome to the next edition of the Just Sales webcast that we have here at ESX School of Management. My name is Devarangarajan, I'm your host, and now we are continuing on the previous webcast where we had Jaime Lopez from Aiven, who was talking about how the role of marketing is changing from just strategic marketing into marketing operations, and of how does content fit into it, and again, all the different ways by which technology is also, and the technification was the exact term that Jaime used, how technification is actually driving the professionalization of marketing ops. So, Jaime, thank you again for taking the time to talk to us.
Thanks for having me, Deva. It's really a pleasure.
Indeed. So, Jaime, in the previous session, as I had mentioned, we were talking a lot about how things are changing and how marketing is becoming more and more accountable. We were talking about markups, and you said in the future there could even be things like RevOps, revenue operations, where marketing and sales together are held accountable for the actual business that you're able to be doing as well. So, from that viewpoint, tell me how important has it become for you and other people like you to look at marketing to be held more accountable, or at least even if nobody holds you accountable, you want to be there telling everybody how much you're contributing to business. Tell me a little bit more about that.
Yes, definitely. There's a massive shift. It's something that I'm happy I've been a part of. I've seen it in my prior company. I see it now, and it comes with that whole mindset change, the dimension of technification. If we turn marketing from an art into a science, we have to be able to measure it. And measurement is a double-edged sword. It's very nice when things go right, but it exposes all your flaws when things are not right. So I'm killed by the sword, died by the sword. You have to be comfortable having those conversations, and you have to be comfortable judging the results fairly and assuming failure when there is failure. There is pressure that wasn't there before, in terms of having to fix these things. But I always equate having a world-class marketing ops team to climbing a rock wall. And I think there are three parts to that. So first one for me is execution with the tools that I have now. What do I do? My inbound and outbound today. Where do I put my hands and feet? The second one is development. So what other tools do I need? 2 meters up the wall, where should I go? Which route to take? The third one, and probably most important one, measurability. How far up I am? How fast am I climbing? How much gas do I have left in the tank? So that is the part of it. It's a new framework.
And I love this, right? Because one of the things that you have, and I think what I like about your role, because your role is actually content and marketing operations, because you can have a cliff and all that kind of stuff, but if you don't have the right kind of equipment, you cannot go anywhere up, right? You're doomed, right? So tell me and help me understand, because there's a lot of stuff that talks about, there's even a paper written 15 years ago that I still use in my classes. It was called Ending the War Between Marketing and Sales, right? And essentially, the idea was that marketing would be creating collateral that was not necessarily helpful to the sales organization or stuff like that. But now what you're saying is that, well, you know what? Because even the sales process is changing. That's what we discussed in the previous session. If you don't have content, the salesperson also is handicapped, because at the end of the day, your competition, if they do a much better job of bringing the content before your sales rep can do, then the salesperson is having a tough job. So help me understand this idea of, before we start staring into analytics, how important is content, and what role does the sales organization have to do in even developing that kind of content and then building on that content afterwards?
It is extremely important in both contexts, both in kind of them fighting their sales war, and also in ending the war between sales and marketing. If we don't give them content that is appropriate to their audience and that helps them do their job, we are sending them into the battle without weapons. If they fail, we are partly responsible. But if they succeed, we're also partly responsible, because now we can measure it.
Because that's usually what happens, right? When they succeed, it's all them. It's not you that you help them, but it's just all the salespeople who did everything, right? So essentially,
But if it's a battle of impressions, it's very difficult to win it, because and you're studying this currently. The archetype of personality of sales is much more less oriented to cooperation, let's say that way,
Yeah.
Whereas the one of marketing might not necessarily be so. But if it's a battle of facts, it's very, very difficult to argue and to buffalo over facts and numbers. So you can't say whatever you want, but my numbers say that 20% of the wins are because of the content you're going into discussion with.
Indeed. And it's also interesting that you talked about, because in the previous, you talked about how one of the things you need to have is analytical skills for marketers, right? Because people normally associate marketers with a very, very creative type. It's not that you cannot be creative, but you also have to have the analytical mindset as well. I just want to let you as well know that there's a recent paper that came out again that says that successful salespeople are the ones who also should not shy away from analytics. So you can see a kind of a convergence happening out here in terms of the need for people to be able to analytical in how they look at things. So from that viewpoint, if you try and take a look at all the different platforms that you use, in your conversation earlier, you talked about CRM, you talked about marketing automation, but then there's also marketing automation is one part of outbound, but you have inbound, with search engine optimization, then paid ads, blogs, vlogs, running marketing campaigns. Take me through some of the analytics that perpetuate the world of marketing operations today.
Probably the most important or the hottest topic you'll hear marketing analytics today is attribution. Figuring out how much money is generated by our marketing, how responsible different channels or touchpoints are for conversions. That is something that everybody is doing for good reasons. I've done it a few times in the past. Each of these projects is a whole world of its own. They're super interesting, and having enough analytical and statistical tools to attack the problem is absolutely necessary. So that's one. Another thing that is becoming very, very important is customer lifetime value modeling. So being able to, with the data that we have today, infer, predict the value of a customer over their lifetime going into the future, so that you have an idea of how much money and effort you should invest in each customer. For example, airlines do this very well with loyalty programs. And they know that when you're in a certain tier of a loyalty program, they expect your lifetime value as a customer to be something, and they give you services matching that. Another thing that is very important and has become extremely relevant, for example, for software as a service companies and general startups since the advent of the Lean Startup, the book by Eric Ries, is cohort analysis. Starting measurement frameworks with every cohort of new users and following that same cohort throughout their lifetime.
Interesting. Yeah.
I completely advise and tell the members of my team to read the Lean Startup for that reason, because that allows you to see interesting points, like, for example, when your engine of growth for the company is stalling, or when you're seeing that your content is converting all the way up to here, but at this particular point of the funnel, there's something broken, and you'll only see those things and be able to optimize them with a cohort analysis.
But Jaime, but cohort, don't you run the risk that, see, for you to run a cohort, I'm assuming this is what I'm thinking of cohort, right? Let's say, for example, you start and in the month of January, you have so many customers coming in, let's say, for example, right? And within that set of customers, then you set up, what can I say, would be some kind of a lifetime value, and you create smaller subsegments, and then you want to follow those customers who fall under a particular cohort, and you want to follow them, right? But isn't there an assumption that these customers within that evolve the same way? Because there are so many things that could be happening in your customer's organization that you cannot control, right? So for example, so how much should you then pay attention to, or should there be other indicators? Because for me, that's the risk I always think, because I can understand in a B2C, it's going to be quite different because customers more or less have a particular way of working, but firms grow, you know what I mean? They expand, of course.
Yeah, there are always factors outside of our control. And when we design experiments, we have to account for that. We normally do, for example, an analysis of variance analysis, and we see, like, okay, what part of the difference, for example, in conversion rate can we explain with the factors we're controlling for? And a large percentage of that, maybe we cannot explain it. But that allows us to do very systematized experiments throughout the funnel. We have a whole function that their reason to be is to experiment with our product and try to make it as seamless as possible.
Indeed. That's very interesting. Essentially, yeah, so experimentation, right? So that's another interesting part that you talk about experimentation, right? So
Mhm.
experimentation is, it can go along so many things. So tell me about some of the types of experiments that you do in your job or you were doing before in the past. You know what I mean? The kind of
Yeah.
experiments. One is, of course, how would certain campaigns work in different stages? But tell me about some of the experiments that marketers should be not afraid of doing.
Right. So the underpinning of all of this is design of experiment statistics. There's
Yeah.
nothing super fancy about it. It takes a bit to learn it, but then that's kind of what moves all the experiments. Some things we experiment with: product design. How many stages does it take you to do this? What happens if we bundle these two things and allow you to do them with one click? What happens if we change the location of the call to action? Or what happens if instead
Yeah.
of sending you this email after 3 days, we send it after 2 days?
Mhm.
We do a lot of that,
Mhm.
nudging people to try integrations.
Mhm.
Does that result in an uptick in conversion rate if a
Mhm.
person has used the integration or not? I have a team of brilliant colleagues who do this literally every day, and we ship
Yeah.
like dozens of experiments a month.
That's very interesting, right? Because for me, one of the things I've heard, and again, you should understand that predominantly till I completely started understanding how the role of sales and marketing and everything is changing. The thing that was a big thing that we were talking about was a book in sales written by some consultants from McKinsey that talked about how increasingly you should be looking at micro segmentation because of the kind of data that's available. Then again, within that micro segmentation, experimentation is key.
Mm-hmm.
From what I hear you say, you're also talking the same thing, right? So the moment of segmentation at the level of customer lifetime value, and within that, you might have micro segmentations about one cohort as against the other.
Yes.
Indeed, right? And then you're also now talking about how you can actually look at experimentation there as well. And I'm assuming that experimentation for you is as much on the form as much as it is in the kind of stakeholders you're trying to reach, right? So I'm assuming that, okay, what kind of message might work with the user of
Mm-hmm.
the customer or a developer, right? Or what kind of message might work for a CTO? When would this message work with the CTO? What stage of the buying process would it work? I'm assuming these are the kind of experiments
These are the kind of things.
that you're talking about.
Messaging experiments are less common than kind of pure product experiments.
Okay,
So
got it.
we tweak our product roughly every day or every week.
Wow. Okay, got it. So even the product, so the messaging. So why is it that you don't do messaging? For example, let's say you're going to have 3 or 4 personas.
Mm-hmm.
Let's try tweaking the message. So for example, for developers, should we be sending the message in the morning or should we be sending the messages in the afternoon?
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Or we should not be doing it. We should just have a call for action and have AI take over that kind of content messaging. So why are you, or is it something that's planned for the future?
We are doing some of those things,
Yeah.
like for example, send time optimization. We do it.
Yeah.
And we optimize kind of on an individual basis. When is this person most likely to open the email?
Yeah.
But we should do more, and we're planning to do more. It has to do with kind of
Okay.
a lack of resources or a lack of people.
Got it. Got it. Indeed. So, which is again, which brings back to the question, right? Because a lack of resources is mostly because it's a chicken or egg problem, right? They want to say, hey, tell me exactly the impact you're making, and you tell them, hey, give us a little bit more resources, and we'll tell you exactly where we are making an impact. So, tell me about the kind of the challenges that a marketing leader like you faces. When going and asking for budgets, you know what I mean? Or worse, this is the idea that everybody has, right? Everybody has this idea that when times get tough in B2B organizations, the first budget that gets cut is marketing budgets, right? So tell me about how you go about preparing, to have that kind of conversations. What kind of numbers do you have? You know what I mean? And how do you go
Yeah.
about convincing the C-suite about continuing their trust that they place in you?
My approach to this tends to be very numerical as well. And since we've discussed and I've built attribution models, I've normally been able to pinpoint, like, if you invest 100K in marketing more per year, this is the return you can expect. So it's a pure, simple, cold, heartless financial case. Sometimes that works with a C-suite. There's times that has worked for me, and there's times when it has not worked. And I myself, I'm biased and I struggle to understand that if I can put on your desk an investment with an internal rate of return of 13%, why would you say no?
No.
They have, it's their pay grade, not mine, to decide. But being numerical kind of moves and being very money based moves the discussion to a plane where they might be comfortable. If you don't have that data, growth projections might help you, or conversion rates might help you, or these experiments that we've been discussing where you can see that when I tweak this, I can reduce churn rate by 5%. That is money. And you don't have a super complete picture, but you know that by tweaking things little by little, you're minimizing waste.
So one of the biggest challenges that, of course, C-suite might sometimes even be easier to convince than your sales teams, right? How do you go about having your conversations with sales leaders? You know what I mean? What kind of, so numbers is only one aspect, right? Because they're going to say that's great, but those numbers mean nothing if they don't go out and sell. I mean, whether it's right or not is a different story. That's the kind of thing, right? So tell me about what kind of argumentations do you use when you try and talk to sales leaders?
One route I often take is to portray this as, in very sales terms, we are not here to replace them or do sales work. We are not working on commission. We don't have sales targets. They are the 00 agent who go and kind of on the difficult mission, save the world and make the sale. We are the Q branch who opens the right door at the right time and gives them the right weapon at the right time so that they can go and fulfill their mission. We are in a sense a servant team, and we are happy being so. We live and die by the success of sales.
And do you actually also look, and do you actually push for having joint KPIs with the sales organization? You know what I mean? So that in that way, you are also saying together we rise or together we fall?
Yes, absolutely. And I've done it before that at my previous employer, we asked that my team's bonuses were tied to revenue percentage. And when you are willing and able to show how much revenue you're contributing, and you're willing and able to take that accountability, that if things go wrong, we also take the fall. They take you much more seriously.
One of the things that I always suggest, I'm not sure if companies do it, is that fact that all the good work that you're doing, right, at the end of the day is sometimes lost in the day-to-day buzz of what salespeople do, right? So to what extent do you think that you will kind of ask your team to maybe even have a presence in like sales meetings, right? Where you ask for maybe 10, 15 minutes. Again, if it's a, like, if it's a 3-hour meeting or a quarterly meeting of the sales force, that you get around 15 minutes or even 10 minutes to display some numbers that talk about what you've done for them, so that salespeople also realize that, wait a minute, I'm not doing this myself. I actually have my colleagues who can help me out here as well.
Yeah, that's a way to do it. It's not the way I do it or we do it.
Okay, sure.
We've gone a different route. Our company has a relatively short sales cycle and a culture of extreme transparency. So every day at 10 a.m., we get an email, all of us, from an automated reporting framework where we see the annual recurring revenue, the profit margin, the amount of trials started, whether the opportunities that have been closed have been originated by sales, by marketing, or joint effort. So that information is beamed at us every day to everybody in the company.
Fantastic. And I know that the current company is a different business model than the previous one that you worked with. So I guess when the sales cycle times are longer, in my head, it's very important to do what you just said, but it does not get done, correct?
Correct. Because, absolutely correct.
You know what? I would imagine that in short sales cycle times, sometimes you don't have the time, you realize the importance of it. Whereas in longer sales cycle times is pretty much where it becomes even more important. That when the salesperson is not there in front of the customer, it's your marketing collateral that is keeping the message constantly in the head of the customer. And that's where you should be looking at. So I think the sales cycle and the history and the legacy of the company you work for also plays a very important role there, right?
Completely agree. Something that I would like to see in companies with longer sales cycles is deal postmortems. So after you've won a deal, yes, celebrating is great, but everybody forgets about it when the kind of last champagne bottle is open.
Indeed.
After a celebration, I would want to sit down with a team that worked on the deal and see like, okay, also like what were the key success factors in this deal? And now let's look at the marketing touch points. By the time you set up that meeting with the customer, how many marketing touch points there were? Because there are often dozens of them.
Indeed. I love this. Jaime, I have one last question in the interest of time. And that's a new topic that I'm doing research on, which is customer success, right? Because especially when you talk about ARR, right, annual recurring revenues and stuff like that, it goes past just the sales, right? Essentially, you need the salesperson and the marketing make a promise of what value they can deliver. But then recurring revenue depends upon the ability then of the customer to realize the value that was promised to them. Invariably, in many companies, especially in your companies, you'll have the customer success holding the hand and doing that as well. To what extent do you think that marketing operations increasingly should also be not just doing sales enablement, but also customer success enablement?
Much more than we're doing now.
Yeah.
A reason why we own the keys to the kingdom of content. We have the content producers.
Indeed.
And very often your customer success department is going to rely on that content to provide the white glove experience to the customer.
Indeed.
And we see customer success as a absolutely key success factor. All the large software service companies that have made in the past 10 years are characterized by stellar customer success.
Indeed. In fact, I honestly think, and this is me, is your content marketing team should be talking to the customer success of your customers to see how they took it, so that has impact for your product development, right? So that I understand how the customer success of course, your customer success is also looking at the overall portfolio, out of which one of it is what you do, but understanding how they do it is going to give you insights that you can share with your product development. And you can also try and understand how your immediate customer success, even your success stories that you want to write, you can actually use your customer success to identify those customers that are going to give you the case studies that you might want to.
That's a really good point. Yeah, so I would like to throw into that further.
I would read, because the fact is that then you're not just looking at your immediate customer success, which I think is great, but understanding one thing about your customer success team, not your customer, is going to give you an idea about how your product, which fits into theirs, fits into the overall picture.
Right.
So you can actually see how I can make improvements to mine to make my customer's product better, and understand that as well. So I think that is one of the things that I think, again, as I said, I can only make wish lists. And since you work in an organization, maybe you can actually make it happen. And that's something that we can also discuss in a future session as well.
That would be very interesting.
Indeed. Jaime, that's all the time we have for today. Thank you so much for taking the time to share your insights. And I can only imagine that the team that works with you has a wonderful person who's their champion. And I always find it very interesting when you post things on LinkedIn as well. So thank you so much for taking the time to talk to us.
Huge thanks, Deva. This is a great experience for me, and I learn a lot by discussing this openly and learning from you. Thanks.
Thank you so much. Stay tuned, others, for the next set of webcasts. And once again, thank you, Jaime.